All right, welcome. So my name is Emily Rogan, and I'm the Senior Program Officer for the nonprofit organization United Policyholders. And I'm here today to share our preparedness tips from the trenches. And the main idea around this presentation is to pass along tips from previous disaster survivors about what they would have known about their insurance before they had a loss, and also to make sure that we all do an insurance checkup to make sure that our safety net does not have holes. So I always like to start our presentation with a little bit about United Policyholders. So UP is a nonprofit organization. We are a voice and an information resource for insurance consumers in all 50 states. So we have a very, very insurance-y name, but we don't take any money from insurance companies and we don't sell insurance. We are here as a resource for those who have questions or need information on how to buy the right kind and right amount of insurance, or have questions about maybe an insurance claim that they're going through, or have any other type of issue. So we are funded by donations from individuals and businesses, grants, as well as foundation support for both our disaster recovery work and presentations to this effect to help people get prepared. We are often a source in the media to help be the voice for consumers. And we also have an advocacy program where we are the voice for consumers in courts, legislatures, and public policy forums. And we've been doing this work for 30 years. I've been with the organization for 12 of those years. And, it really comes down to we are empowering people to prepare, rebuild, and recover from disasters. We're subject matter expertise in long-term recovery. We also keep an eye on the insurance marketplace and work with public officials to strengthen laws that support consumers. And we stand up for consumer rights in the media. It was very exciting to be able to look back on our work in Colorado as I was preparing for this presentation. We have done work both in the legislature as well as post-disaster, and now these recovery workshops as well. And so our three programs are that Roadmap to Recovery program that I mentioned, where we help people after disasters. We were in Colorado for the 4 Mile Canyon fire in 2010, and then unfortunately there were quite a few disasters that happened afterwards. The 2011 High Park Woodland Heights fire in Larimer County, Waldo Canyon fire down in Colorado Springs, the Black Forest fire, and then the flooding as well. And then again, we are here today to help make sure that everyone has the right kind and right amount insurance, how to shop wisely and protect your assets. And, we had some success with our advocacy program in Colorado, getting the Colorado Homeowners Insurance Reform Act of 2013 passed back in 2013. So again, today I'm here for to give you a presentation for tips from the trenches. Does your safety net have holes? And this presentation is made possible by a UASI grant, so that's the Urban Area Security Initiative. So a big thank you to the City and County of Denver for coordinating this workshop to the people of Denver. So I'm excited to be able to share this information with you. We do have a Q&A function on this webinar. So if you do have a question, feel free to type it in. And if I don't get to your question as we go along, I will be sure to answer it at the end. So our tips from the trenches, what it really comes down to is that disasters cause massive destruction, and it's almost always insurance money, not charitable or government aid, that is the source of funding that help people rebuild and recover after a disaster. So it is the #1 source of money that will help you rebuild and repair your home and your life after if something happens. That's an important point, because when we're talking about disasters, we can be talking about these massive wildfires that are happening now, or the flooding that happened. But honestly, if it's a house fire and only one house goes down, if that's your house, that's a disaster. It's awful. And so you want to make sure that your insurance money is there when you need it and that you know how to use it. That is what we do. So FEMA assistance is all often needs-based, and the maximum amount you can get is $35,000. So if it is a large disaster, yes, FEMA will come in, but it is not as easy or not as guaranteed as you may think. There are other sources of money and sources of aid as well, but SBA loans, which are available to people who have lost their homes in declared disasters, they take time for it to process and they must be repaid. And then, charitable aid such as Red Cross sheltering or a Tzu Chi Foundation gift card, those really cover your basic emergency needs, not the cost of rebuilding. So part of the importance here is that the devil is in the details, and it's all fine print when we're talking about insurance. So it's so important to have the right kind and right amount of insurance. When you're shopping, you're often sold one product, and what we see on TV, maybe ads we see now that football's back, that is one thing, but what you really get is you get a policy that is a one-year contract, and in it says exactly what you get. So we want to make sure that at the point of sale, and right now when you do an insurance checkup, you are aware of what really matters in that insurance. So this is something that really is important because it's your insurance agent that may have set your limits, and depending on when they did it, and maybe you were focused on just that dollar amount of the cost at that time, you want to make sure that we do this checkup so that your limits are what you would need if you had to rebuild your home. And then again, inside that policy, the language is different from company to company, and sometimes within each company, a different policy might have different language. So this really matters because we know what the fine print is that you're looking for, and we'll get into that in this presentation. We know what matters, what that fine print you're looking for, because the difference between saying a or any can make a big difference when we're talking about dollars. And so what is the problem? What are we seeing? We're seeing that sometimes people have coverage problems and sometimes people have claim problems. And claim problems are a result of how the claim is being handled. And if you're a squeaky wheel, and a lot of what we do on when in our Roadmap to Recovery program is to teach people how to be their own best advocate, how to create this paper trail, and how to get what they need and when they need it. That's how you can overcome a claim problem. But coverage problems, when it comes down to the amount that you have, it's extremely difficult to solve after the fact. And so that is what we're tackling here today, to make sure that your coverage is what you think you have, what you think you bought, so that if you need it, it will be there for you. So we see the biggest problem we see is underinsurance, that the amount people bought is too little. So it's a lot of money. It's definitely, 6 figures. That first check is usually a larger amount than anyone's ever seen in their lifetime. However, it's just not enough to rebuild a house. Underinsurance is the biggest problem we see. There are a lot of other problems that we deal with. And so today, our tips from the trenches are tackling underinsurance as one portion of that problem. So after disasters, we often do Roadmap to Recovery surveys where we ask disaster survivors about how the recovery process is going, what challenges they're facing, where do they need more support. And after the Black Forest fire, 46% of survey respondents said that they were underinsured. And with the Hyde Park and Woodland Heights fire, 54% of survey respondents were underinsured. So those two pieces, really show how big the problem is. So, if you look to, just to the person sitting right next to you, if we were at a public workshop, oh, how I miss being in public. That is one of those things where someone, there's a very high chance that one of you is severely underinsured. So we've also done these surveys in California, in Santa Rosa. They had wildfires back in 2017 with, in that area, 2/3 of people were underinsured by an average of over $300,000. So we're not talking about small amounts of money where you would feel comfortable taking a small loan out. We're talking about high, a very large chunk that is bigger than most people have in their savings accounts, and it's not that's not the use of insurance. You want to make sure that you're paying for this product and that you have enough so that you can use, when you need to use it, it will be there. So how do we know if we are underinsured? How do we know more about our insurance policy? So the first thing we want you to do is to review your declarations page. So that is one piece of paper, usually one of the first pieces that you get, and it will have different buckets of coverage. And those buckets are your dwelling coverage, your contents coverage, other structures, and also your additional living expense coverage. So not all policies are alike, not all policies look alike, but most of the time they have these main 4 buckets of coverage, and then they have endorsements that add coverage to the policy and deductibles that tell you how much the damage has to exceed for you to be able to use your insurance. And so if you have a renter's insurance policy, you will likely have contents and additional living expense coverage, and also liability, which is included in most policies, but you will not have that dwelling and other structures coverage. But renters, you know, for homeowners, the most important is that dwelling coverage. For renters, often it's making sure your contents is enough, but also that additional living expense coverage. So when we get to that point, that's a really important piece for renters. So here is a sample deck page. So as we can see, we have those 4 buckets of coverage, and then we also have down here we have endorsements that add value to the policy. So this policy has, excuse me, this policy has 150% additional coverage for extended replacement cost coverage. So if this was a total loss, this dwelling number up here would be multiplied by 150%. So instead of $300,000, it would have $450,000 of coverage. So that's why it's important to have this declarations page so you can see what is included in your policy. But your declarations page may look a little different. Here's another example, and you can see on this one that you have those same buckets of coverage, but there are a few things that make this policy different that you want to look for on your own homeowner's insurance policy as well. And the first one is that the loss of use coverage says up to 12 months, and it says unlimited. So in this policy, you have as much of a dollar amount as you can prove that you need for your temporary living expense coverage if you can no longer live in your home, but you have up to 12 months to use it. And what we find is after disasters, people need at least 24 months, sometimes more. So if you have a policy that has this kind of language, you want to make sure that one of the questions that you're going to ask your insurance agent when you give them a call and do an insurance checkup is, can I increase this to up to 12 months? That's an important piece right here. So in the policy before, we had a dollar amount for loss of use and no time limit. If you have no time limit in the fine print, there is likely a time limit in the fine print. And it may be 12 months, it may be 24 months. So that is an important piece to check. Okay, so what matters? For homeowners, what really matters is getting that dwelling coverage number right. So you want to have enough of your dwelling coverage. And what that means is it's the amount it would cost to rebuild your home. It has nothing to do with construction. It has everything to do with construction costs and nothing to do with real estate costs. How much you bought it, nothing to do with how much your mortgage is for. It's for how much would it cost to rebuild your home from the ground up. And then you also, the other things that matter are that extended replacement cost coverage. So how much you have. If you have building code upgrade coverage, that's an important one. And then also sewer and water backup coverage. That's a really important piece for homeowners. So for homeowners and renters, we want to make sure that you have enough additional living expense coverage. So that's a really important piece. That is how much you would have if you had to live somewhere else. For homeowners, you still have to pay your mortgage if you've had damage and you need to do something else. But if you have, let me go back for a second. If you have additional living expense, if you still have to pay your mortgage, but your temporary rental is covered by insurance. However, with renters, if you were paying $2,000 a month for rent and you can find a temporary place for $3,000, you would get $1,000 because you don't have to pay your rent while you don't live there while the home is being rebuilt, but you do have to pay an additional incurred expense, so that you would get the difference between what your rent was and what your new rent is for that time. So that's an important piece, making sure you have enough, especially if you're a homeowner, for how much, for having enough coverage to cover at least 2 years for a homeowner. Having replacement cost coverage is so important. It's more important than having actual cash value. That's for your contents. Really important. Scheduling your valuables is an important piece for homeowners. There are often sublimits, and we'll get to those a little later. And then also keeping an eye out for exclusions. So what is not covered? But the one that I want to go back to is up here, and it's know your deductible. And that could be either a dollar amount, a percentage, or both. So if we go back to our examples, you can see that in this declarations page, it has 2 deductibles. It has $1,000 for, say, if you had a kitchen fire, or if you had a wildfire, or if you had something really awful happen that is covered. But if that really awful thing is wind and hail, you have a separate deductible. There's a separate amount. So instead of $1,000, your deductible would be 1%. So you see your coverage A up here, and 1% of that is how much of a deductible you have for wind and hail. So that's a new trend that we're seeing more of, is having this separate, this wind and hail parsed out as a separate peril with a separate deductible. And 1% may seem, you may have gotten a notice that, oh, it's only 1%, but if they switch that to 2%, or if there's some change, that could mean a big difference when we're talking dollars. So understanding your deductible is really important. The other thing to keep in mind is if you have wind or hail damage and it ends up being less than this amount or only slightly higher, and you file a claim, that could have a negative impact on your claims history, which means your rates will go up, your premiums may go up. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little later. But the first policy that I showed just had one flat deductible for their policy. So it says homeowners special form $1,000 deductible right up here. So if you just had a quick glance and didn't really know where to look, you might not be able to see that, but that's an important piece when you get your deck page, when you're doing your insurance checkup, to find out what your deductible is. Okay. So getting the big number right. As we mentioned, for homeowners, it's so important to get that coverage A number right. And the question you want to be able to answer is how much you have per square foot to rebuild. So taking that number of the dollar amount and dividing it by the square footage of your house, and that is how much you have per square foot. So if you get a local, that is a good, that you'll get a ballpark number. And we're seeing in the Denver area that it's around, if you have less than 300, you're likely underinsured. So it's important. One other thing you can do is just call a local contractor and say, what does it cost to build in our area at this point? Knowing that that is your base, and you are trying to increase that with your extended replacement cost, because that extended replacement cost percentage, that is what you're doing is you're ensuring that when we have multiple losses for a big disaster, when supply and demand are completely out of whack, and and all the additional building code changes that have to happen for your home, and maybe foundation work and all of the extra pieces, that's what that extended replacement cost coverage is for. It's not, so make sure you have that big number right, that coverage A number right, before you do the math of adding that percentage in. That's the main point. But really, we want you to know what your number is, and then make sure that you talk to your insurance agent as well. So you've talked to a contractor, you have a ballpark of how much coverage you have per square foot, and then talk to your agent and say, I want to make sure that if the worst case scenario happens, that my home is protected. And I think that, I want, how did you get to this number? And having that conversation and taking notes. So you'll hear a theme throughout this presentation. One of those things will be make sure that coverage A number is right. Another one will be when you talk to your insurance agent, take notes, follow up in writing. So exclusions. So exclusions take away coverage from your policy. So in the fine print, there are often exclusions for flood, for water damage. So if there sometimes some policies say if it's been leaking, it's not covered. Some policies say it has to have just had a accidental burst to a pipe, that is covered, but anything else is not. Any water that rises is usually not covered. You will find the specific language for your exclusions in your policy. But with each exclusion, and home-based business is a really important one since a lot of us are working from home now. If you work for yourself, most of your equipment or supplies will likely not be covered under your homeowner's insurance. So that's a big one that I wanted to mention as well. But for most exclusions, if you think that exclusions take away coverage from your policy, you can typically buy an endorsement to put that coverage back. So again, home-based business, you can get some of that covered by adding an endorsement. Sometimes earthquakes, you can add an endorsement for that. You can add any sublimits for your contents. You can usually add an endorsement or a rider to cover that specific item. Again, and then you likely have to add coverage for flood, but you can add with a separate policy, but you can add coverage for water and sewer backup, and then also for building code upgrades. If there, one of the questions that you're going to ask your insurance agent when you do a checkup is, are there higher limits for these? Do I have the basics, or can you sell me more coverage to make sure that I have enough for sewer backup? That's an important one because sometimes the limits are very low, like $5,000. That's all you would get for a sewer incident, which is a very sticky situation. And then building code upgrades, that really depends on how old your home is, right? But if you have a newer home, what's in your policy is likely okay. But if you have a turn of the century home, not this century, the one before that, likely you will need more coverage there. And so if you go to your insurance agent and you find that you feel like you know more about insurance and how to protect your assets from participating in a 30-minute webinar than in a conversation with them, you might want a different agent. So one thing to keep in mind is that it does not hurt to shop around. When you buy insurance, you are buying a one-year product. Most people buy that same product over and over and over and over and over again. But you can shop around, and shopping around can often lower your premiums, but it can also, you can also see if there's better coverage out there. So it never hurts to shop around. We recommend that you just a little bit about how to shop for insurance. We recommend that you talk to a professional. It's so easy to just kind of find coverage online, but really talking to a professional and asking your neighbors if they like their agent. If you know anyone who's had a claim, that's a really important factor. How well did their policy hold up, and then how helpful was their agent? Those are important things. But also knowing the difference between an independent agent and an independent insurance broker and an insurance agent. Those are two separate categories of people who can sell insurance, and the insurance agent can only typically sell one policy. So I usually don't use any examples, but it's usually helpful for people to know that, say, a State Farm agent can usually only sell you a State Farm policy. And a Allstate agent can only sell you an Allstate policy, or a policy that Allstate owns, another company that Allstate owns. So while that's like a one-to-one, if you're really shopping for insurance, finding an insurance broker that can sell you multiple different kinds from different companies, that can be really helpful. And so we do have the Matchup Insurance Finder, which can match you with an independent broker. But again, you still have to do your due diligence, ask some questions, make sure that you are getting what you need. So I'm going to go into contents a little bit. So there are common sublimits and caps for almost everything that you have in your house. So but you can usually if there's something special to you in your home and it's very valuable, you may want to see if you can get a rider or an endorsement just to cover that piece. So everything in this picture, there's usually a sublimit, and it's usually something that's really special to you. So if you have watches or firearms or jewelry or silver or furs or cash or your stamp collection or your musical instrument collection, in your policy, in that fine print, you will find that list of sublimits. So that's an important piece there. So you want to think about what is very special to you and also look in your policy, because it can be devastating when you've lost something very special to you and then the insurance will not pay you for it. And then creating a home inventory. This is one of the action steps I really want everyone to take away from this presentation, is making sure that you do some sort of documentation of what you have. So if you do have a total loss, you are most of the time required to write down every single item that you lost, about when you got it from, about how much you could replace it from, where you got it, and then you will get the actual cash value of those items until you replace everything. So it's a very complicated process, and it is extremely heart-wrenching to have to, you know, have gone through the trauma of losing your home and then also have to then write down every single thing you lost. It's awful. So if you have some sort of documentation, it makes the process a lot easier. So what you can do is, you know, just take pictures of your home, walk around with and create a video, just open drawers, open closets, you know, just describe everything that you have, but then saving it in a safe place is really important. And whether that means, you know, you're just doing a video on your iPhone and then emailing that video to yourself, and it's in your email, that's fine. But we don't want you to use some sort of technology that you don't know how to access when you need it. So what that means is you might take actual pictures and send them to your sister in another state. If that's the best solution for you, then that's great. But if you want to make sure that it's in the cloud, but you know where it is and you know how to use it, and you've told someone else, just in case, you know, you're in a fog, it's a really important thing to make sure that you do. Okay, so we did get a question about this, so I want to address it right now. It says, on total losses, how often do you see insurance companies pay out the limits for personal property, since it's so time-consuming to pull together the inventory list to prove what you lost? Do you have any advice on how to resolve the personal property claim in an expedient fashion? Great question. That's a really important one. So I just want to say that we have had some success in the recent wildfires in California in having insurance companies waive the inventory. So they will just pay you out 100%. And sometimes that's a really good thing, because sometimes that means that, that they are doing the right thing and they know that they owe this, everything is gone, and they will cut a check for that amount. Sometimes they are cutting that check because the person is so severely underinsured that it would be a telltale sign of how underinsured they are, and so they're just cutting a check. So that is a sadder version of that scenario. But we are seeing it happen more and more, that that the insurance companies are waiving that requirement at 100%. Some of them are waiving it at 75%. So it really depends on your personal situation on whether or not you would take 75% of your limit as a trade-off to not have to produce that list. It's really a personal decision. A lot of our recovery guidance is based on there's no one path for everybody. If it's going to be too painful for you to list everything, absolutely ask for a 100% waiver. If they say no, try to do the inventory. If they say no again, you know, ask for 100% again. And if they say no, see where you can get. It really depends on the personal situation. We're hoping to move it more in that direction. So again, some limits. This is taken from one policy, and it is about standards. So about 25% for business, for personal property, $1,000 for watches, $1,000 for jewelry, Sometimes they're combined into one category. You really have to read your policy to know what your limits are. And then again, one of the themes of today is to make sure that you're taking the time to talk to your insurance agent, take notes, follow up with an email, follow any recommendations they have to increase your coverage, and then save those notes in a safe place. And an email is the best trick because then you have done your due diligence. And the important thing there is because it is unless you are being very specific that you are trying to make sure your limits are enough and your insurance agent is pushing back, it can often feel like after disasters that contract sticks, right? So you only have this amount of coverage. It is so hard to move those limits afterwards. But if you have that paper trail, then maybe it was an error that the insurance agent made an error on how much they should have insured you for. And that can be an opening for more insurance coverage. But that is a very slim chance. That's why we're doing these presentations. That's why we want to make sure that you are sitting down with your agent, getting that coverage A number right, going over, asking them lots of questions. And that's the next slide. And then following it up and putting it in writing. And so questions to ask your insurance agent when you talk to them. And honestly, it's going to be difficult to maybe have a sit down these days, but if you do it over the phone, most transactions with insurance are done over the phone because there is no paper trail. So make sure you're taking notes. You can even snap a picture of your notes and send it to them, as long as you are very clear. I often say, make sure your insurance goals are known. What is it that you want? Are you trying to cover your whole house? Make sure you say it out loud, say it a few times, write it down, right? So will this policy cover the cost of rebuilding my home from the ground up? What causes of loss are not covered? Making sure you know what is excluded is very important. Can you fill that gap with another piece of coverage? Is it available? Are there limits on replacing property to match, or if there's only cosmetic damage? How long will your additional living expenses be covered if there is a loss and you can't live in your home? And then again, what are my current deductibles? So what if, ask about any scenarios. It's a really important conversation to have. And by doing so, you're flagging to them that you are paying attention as well. So one gap that is something that is an individual decision for most people is flood insurance. If you live in a flood zone, your mortgage company will likely require you to buy flood insurance for the mortgage. However, if you don't live in a flood zone, and between 2014 and 2018, more than 40% of flood claims were outside of this high risk area where you have to buy flood insurance, it's a personal decision to do so. And as long as you know that flooding is not going to be covered, you have to look at your own specific property and your own risk. What would you do if there was a flood? And, do you have a furnished basement? What is your home? What are the individual characteristics? Would you be able to cover these costs out of pocket? If you're not required to buy flood insurance is likely less expensive than you think because it's not required. So we do encourage you to ask your insurance agent how much it costs to add flood coverage. You can do some research online through floodsmart.gov. That's the National Flood Insurance Program, which is where most people purchase their flood insurance. There are other independent flood insurance companies as well. And then a new thing that I saw recently was that Realtor.com added I forget what it was called, a flood factor, I believe that's what they called it, a feature to their site where you can look up your property and then it will have a score from 1, very low, to 10, very high, risk for your property. So that is another point of information that may help you make that decision. But like most products, there are limitations for flood insurance. You can only get up to $250,000 for your building. and there's no additional living expense coverage. So if there is some sort of flooding and you cannot live in your home, there is not protection from flood insurance. You won't be able to have any benefits to help cover the cost of living somewhere else. Okay, and then updating your safety net. So it's really important, I think, to make sure that when you have big life events, whether it's remodeling your kitchen or someone moves into your home, or you decide to use your home as an Airbnb, whether you get married or divorced or you get a new dog, all of these things can have big implications on your insurance, meaning, and not in a positive way. So some breeds of dogs are not covered in your policy. Sometimes, you know, there may be exclusions for the shared economy. You have to look in your policy to see if it says anything about that. If someone moves into your home, their person, and they are not directly related to you as a dependent, sometimes it matters that they're a dependent, sometimes it doesn't. Someone moves into your home, just check with your insurance agent and get it in writing if it's okay. But those remodeling upgrades are really important, because usually if it's over $5,000, they require you to tell your insurance company, or else it may not be covered if something does happen. So we talked a lot about how to bulk up your insurance safety net, and that is because we often see that people fall short. But we don't want it to feel like we're just asking you to add and add and add to your insurance, when, you know, the goal is to just make sure you are protecting your assets. So if you need to reduce the cost, there are ways to do that without reducing your coverage. And the most important thing there is to consider raising your deductible. And so take a look at your homeowner's policy, and if you have find where your deductible is, and if it's a dollar amount, what you can do is you can ask your insurance agent to show you what different levels of deductible, what the cost is with different levels. So if you raise it from $1,000 to $2,500 or $5,000, have them give you quotes of how much that will reduce your annual amount. That's an important thing. So also taking the time to shop around. Sometimes bundling will save you money, but sometimes, you know, it's just, sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. But if asking your insurance agent what kind of discounts are available to you as well, if they run through what kind of discounts they have, and you didn't tell them when you installed an alarm, or maybe they had your distance to a fire hydrant wrong, or fire station, you know, those things matter. So just having that conversation is important. And then checking your clue report for errors, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but your clue report is a report that tracks how many claims you've made, and different insurance companies have different underwriting rules on how many claims put you in different categories. Sometimes it means that they will no longer offer you coverage when your 1-year policy is up if you've had too many claims. So making sure that there are no errors on your clue report can help you either keep your coverage, or maybe even put you in a bracket if you fix an error to reduce your coverage. And then again, you know, in these times where, you know, a lot of things are uncertain, it is important to know that you can save money on other ways as well. So for your auto insurance, if you no longer commute to work because you're working from home, that might be one. You might be able to reduce your auto insurance by letting them know that your annual miles have gone down. You know, you can, again, asking to raise your deductible where appropriate, and there are a couple other items. So there are always a few ways to save on insurance if you feel like that number is creeping up again and again. A little bit more about the clue report. So there's a link on this website, and we're going to be sending out a document with a lot of the resources that we're referencing today. So you can get a free copy of your clue report, and that is how you will be able to see how many claims. So sometimes people just call to ask a question about something that may they're thinking about filing a claim, maybe not, they've had a little bit, something happened. Sometimes agents just put that down as a claim and start it without you saying, I am calling to file a claim. So it's important to make sure that you know what is on your clue report and clean it up if there are any errors. And then again, there may be discounts for different COVID considerations. So if you no longer drive, you know, that's another thing. But also if you have had any special considerations, if you know, there has been a bulletin put out by DORA, which is the Colorado Division of Insurance, to work with people who need help during this time. And we'll include some of those bulletins. And then finally, if you're dropped by your insurer, we do have tips. Again, it can feel really personal when you're dropped by your insurance company, and yet it's usually just an underwriting decision that they've made. And if it is personal, that's likely illegal, so you should contact DORA's Division of Insurance. But if it is just because of an amount of claims that you've had, or maybe they are cutting their coverage, the most important thing is to get the reason and start shopping immediately. So we have lots of tips about that. And then here's the Colorado Division of Insurance's website. They have lots of tools there as well. They are your regulatory agency. A lot of people don't know they exist, but it's an important resource. They are the state agency that oversees insurance in your state. And we hope you will never need us for a claim, but if you do, just make sure that you get a copy of that policy, because you could have lost it if something awful happened. Find out what your loss of use benefits are. Start a claim diary, similar how we are documenting our conversations with insurance agents. You will be doing the same thing with adjusters on the back end, saving your receipts, you know, taking lots of pictures, and then honestly, using United Policyholders as a resource. We hope that you've learned more about our organization and what we have to offer. And I thank you so much for spending your evening with me to learn a little bit more about insurance. So with that, I just want to let you know that we will be sending out any links and a copy of the PowerPoint to attendees of the webinar. And thank you so much.